On a fog-shrouded hilltop overlooking the Pacific Ocean, a castle stands empty. Its marble halls, once filled with the laughter of Hollywood's brightest stars, are silent now. The grand fireplaces that warmed presidents and princes have grown cold. The swimming pools where starlets once lounged beneath California moonlight reflect only clouds. For 28 years, this was the most desired invitation in America. To receive a telegram summoning you to San Simeon meant you had arrived. It meant you mattered. It meant the most powerful private citizen in the United States wanted your company. But tonight, we are not here to celebrate the glamour. We are here to understand what the glamour was hiding. Because behind every golden door of Hearst Castle lies a shadow. Behind every party, a performance. Behind every smile captured in those famous photographs, there was a man running from something he could never escape. His name was William Randolph Hearst. He built an empire of newspapers that shaped American opinion for half a century. He started wars with headlines. He destroyed careers with editorials. He constructed a palace that rivaled anything in Europe and filled it with treasures from across the world. And in the end, he died alone, exiled from his own creation, forbidden by his doctors from ever returning to the enchanted hill he had spent a lifetime building. This is the true story of Hearst Castle, not the tourist version, not the architectural marvel, but the dark and deeply human tragedy of the man who believed he could buy immortality. The inheritance of ambition. To understand the castle, you must first understand the hunger that built it. William Randolph Hearst was born on April 29, 1863, in San Francisco, into circumstances that would shape his entire psychology. His father, George Hearst, was a rough-hewn mining prospector who had struck it rich in the Comstock lode, one of the largest silver deposits ever discovered in America. By the time William was born, his father was already a multimillionaire, and by the time William was a young man, George Hearst had become a United States senator. But George Hearst was rarely home. He was a man of mines and saloons, uncomfortable in parlors, happier in the company of prospectors than politicians. The raising of young William fell almost entirely to his mother, Phoebe "a Person" Hearst. Phoebe was everything George was not: refined, educated, obsessed with culture and art. She took young William on extended tour of Europe, through the cathedrals of Spain, the castles of England, the museums of France. At the age of 10, William Randolph Hearst walked through the halls of Windsor Castle and stood in the shadows of medieval fortresses. Something took root in him during those journeys: a vision, a yearning. He would later write that as a boy, he dreamed of someday building a castle of his own, not in Europe, but in California, on a hill his family owned overlooking the sea. A place called Camp Hill, where his father would take him to sleep under the stars during cattle roundups. The dream never left him. But first he needed power, and power, young William learned, came from controlling what people believed. The rise of the chief. In 1887, William Randolph Hearst convinced his father to give him control of a failing newspaper the senator had acquired as a political tool, the San Francisco Examiner. William was 24 years old. He had been expelled from Harvard for various pranks, including sending chamber pots to faculty members with their names inscribed inside. He had no formal journalism training. He had never run a business. What he had was instinct. Within months, he transformed the Examiner. He hired the best writers, the most aggressive reporters. He printed sensational headlines. He covered scandals, disasters, and crimes with an intensity no other paper could match. Circulation soared. The Examiner became the most-read newspaper in San Francisco. His employees called him the Chief. The nickname would follow him for the rest of his life. But San Francisco was not enough. In 1895, Hearst purchased the New York Morning Journal and set his sights on the most competitive newspaper market in the world. His rival was Joseph Pulitzer, owner of the New York World, and their battle for circulation would change American journalism forever. They called it yellow journalism, sensationalism over substance, emotion over accuracy. The two papers competed to publish the most shocking headlines, the most outrageous stories, the most dramatic illustrations. When the battleship USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor in February 1898, Hearst's papers blamed Spain, without evidence. Remember the Maine became a battle cry. Within months, the United States was at war with Spain. Historians still debate how much responsibility Hearst bears for starting that war. Some say he merely amplified existing tensions. Others say he manufactured them entirely. One famous, though possibly apocryphal, story has Hearst cabling an illustrator in Cuba who reported that everything was quiet. "You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war." Whether or not he spoke those exact words, the sentiment was true. William Randolph Hearst understood that reality was malleable, that perception was power, that whoever controlled the stories controlled the nation. By 1910, Hearst owned newspapers in every major American city. He had expanded into magazines, including Cosmopolitan and Harper's Bazaar. He was producing newsreels that played in theaters across the country. He briefly served in Congress and twice ran for president. Though he never won higher office, his influence was undeniable. Politicians feared him, presidents sought his endorsement, industry titans courted his favor. And with every acquisition, every victory, every enemy destroyed by his headlines, the dream of the castle grew stronger. La Cuesta Encantada. In 1919, William Randolph Hearst stood on Camp Hill, now called La Cuesta Encantada, the Enchanted Hill, and told his architect, Julia Morgan, what he wanted. He was 56 years old. His mother, Phoebe, had died earlier that year, leaving him her fortune, and more importantly, the vast family ranch lands along the California coast. The property encompassed nearly 250,000 acres, larger than many American states. And at its heart, Hearst would build his monument. Julia Morgan was an unlikely partner for the most ambitious private construction project in American history. She was small, soft-spoken, and had been the first woman to earn an architecture degree from the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. But she was also relentless, disciplined, and possessed of infinite patience, qualities she would need desperately in the years ahead. Because Hearst did not have plans, he had visions. He wanted a castle that combined Spanish colonial architecture with Gothic cathedrals, Moorish palaces, and ancient Roman temples. He wanted 165 rooms, including dozens of bedrooms for guests, multiple kitchens, a movie theater, 2 swimming pools, 1 outdoor, 1 indoor, and enough space to house the art collection he had been acquiring for decades. And he wanted it to feel old, as if it had always been there, as if it had risen from the California hills through centuries of history rather than modern construction. Morgan worked with Hearst for 28 years. They exchanged over 2,000 letters. She traveled to San Simeon every weekend, overseeing construction, incorporating his endless changes, sourcing materials from around the world. When Hearst decided he wanted a ceiling from a medieval Spanish monastery, Morgan found one. When he wanted tiles from a Tunisian palace, she arranged their transport. The result was unlike anything America had ever seen. The main building, Casa Grande, rose 137 feet above the hilltop, visible from miles away. Its twin towers dominated the landscape like a European cathedral. Inside, visitors walked through rooms filled with 16th-century tapestries, ancient Greek vases, Egyptian statues, Renaissance paintings, and Gothic choir stalls. The Neptune pool, carved from white marble and surrounded by a Roman colonnade, looked as if it had been transported directly from ancient Rome. The indoor Roman pool, lined with gold-leafed Venetian glass tiles, glowed with an almost supernatural blue light. But the castle was merely the setting. The parties were the performance. The golden age of San Simeon. Beginning in the early 1920s, Hearst Castle became the most exclusive social destination in America. The guest lists read like a catalog of the century's luminaries. Charlie Chaplin, Greta Garbo, Clark Gable, Winston Churchill, Calvin Coolidge, Charles Lindbergh, Salvador Dali, Joan Crawford, Cary Grant. The list was seemingly endless. Invitations arrived by telegram, summoning guests to San Simeon for weekends that could stretch into weeks. A private train car would collect visitors in Lowe's Angels, transporting them north through the night. They would awaken to find themselves at a private station where Hearst's cars, or sometimes his private plane, would carry them the remaining distance to the hilltop. What awaited them defied description. Guests were assigned luxurious private cottages, each decorated with priceless antiques. They could swim, ride horses through the surrounding mountains, or visit Hearst's private zoo, the largest in North America at the time, home to lions, bears, zebras, giraffes, and elephants that roamed the property in open enclosures. Meals were elaborate affairs held in the great dining hall, where Gothic banners hung from vaulted ceilings and guests sat at a table long enough to seat 50. Hearst himself always sat at the center, presiding over conversations that ranged from politics to Hollywood gossip to the state of the world. After dinner came movies. Hearst had his own theater, and he often screened films before their public release, inviting feedback from his famous guests. And somewhere in the background, always, there was music and laughter and the clink of glasses. But there were rules. Hearst despised obvious drunkenness. Guests were allowed one cocktail before dinner and wine during the meal, but anyone who became intoxicated was quietly asked to leave and never invited back. And there was another rule, stranger and more telling than the first. No one was permitted to speak of death at Hearst Castle. If a guest mentioned a recent funeral, a fatal accident, or any form of mortality, the conversation was immediately changed. Hearst could not bear the subject. He was building an eternal paradise. Death had no place within its walls. But death came anyway. The death on the yacht. On November 15, 1924, a man named Thomas Ince boarded William Randolph Hearst's private yacht, the Oneida. Ince was a powerful Hollywood producer known as the father of the Western. He had helped establish the studio system and discovered many stars of early cinema. He was among the most respected figures in the industry. He boarded that yacht a healthy man, celebrating his 43rd birthday. He never walked off. The official story released through Hearst's own newspapers was simple. Ince had suffered acute indigestion and was taken ashore, where he died of heart failure 2 days later. His body was quickly cremated. The investigation, such as it was, concluded almost immediately. But Hollywood whispered a different story. The rumors suggested that Hearst had discovered his mistress, Marion Davies, in a compromising position with another man, possibly Charlie Chaplin, who was aboard the yacht that weekend. In a jealous rage, Hearst had grabbed a gun. In the darkness below deck, he fired and struck not Chaplin but Ince. The truth has never been established. No witnesses ever came forward publicly. The records have long since vanished. Chaplin later denied being aboard, though other accounts place him there. What can be verified is this: Thomas Ince died under circumstances that were never fully explained. His body was cremated before a thorough investigation could occur. Hearst's newspapers controlled the narrative completely, and the most powerful media mogul in America had every resource necessary to bury a scandal. This did not prove guilt, but it raised questions that have never been answered. And it hinted at the darkness that lurked beneath San Simeon's golden surface. Marion. To understand the tragedy of Hearst Castle, you must understand Marion Davies. William Randolph Hearst met her in 1917. He was 54 years old, married with 5 sons, the most powerful publisher in America. She was 20 years old, a chorus girl in a Broadway revue, blonde and beautiful with a slight stammer that she tried desperately to hide. He pursued her relentlessly. Within 2 years, she had left the stage to become a film actress, and Hearst had created an entire production company, Cosmopolitan Productions, to manufacture her career. She was not untalented. By all accounts, Marion Davies had genuine comic gifts, a natural warmth that translated beautifully to screen. But Hearst's relentless promotion worked against her. He insisted on casting her in melodramas and historical epics that did not suit her abilities. Critics mocked her as Hearst's puppet. Hollywood whispered that her success was entirely manufactured. She knew she always knew. And yet she stayed. For over 30 years, Marion Davies was William Randolph Hearst's constant companion. She hosted his parties, charmed his guests, laughed at his jokes, and tolerated his controlling behavior. She never married him. Hearst's wife, Millicent, refused to grant a divorce, but she lived as his partner in every meaningful sense. Was it love? By most accounts, yes. Their relationship, whatever its origins, deepened into something genuine. When Hearst faced financial ruin in the 1930s, Marion sold her jewelry and contributed over $1 million from her own fortune to help him. When his health declined, she nursed him devotedly. But it was also a cage. Marion Davies became entirely dependent on Hearst's world. Her career existed only within his newspapers, his newsreels, his studios. When she tried to assert independence, he grew jealous and possessive. And as the years passed, she drank more and more heavily, a habit Hearst despised but could not control. She was the queen of Hearst Castle. She was also its prisoner. And when the castle fell, she would fall with it. The collapse. The Great Depression did not destroy William Randolph Hearst immediately. His empire was too vast, his resources too deep, but it wounded him in ways he never fully recovered from. By 1937, the Hearst Corporation was more than $87 million in debt. Advertising revenue had plummeted. Newspapers that had once printed gold were hemorrhaging money. The great collector who had spent his life acquiring treasures now faced the humiliation of selling them. And sell them he did. The Hearst collection sale, held over several years through department stores and auction houses, dispersed artwork and antiques that had taken decades to assemble. Medieval armor, Renaissance paintings, entire rooms stripped from European palaces, sold for pennies on the dollar to pay creditors. Hearst was forced to surrender control of his own corporation to a committee of trustees. For a man who had controlled everything, newspapers, politicians, public opinion, it was a devastating blow. He still held the title of chief, but the power had slipped away. Construction at San Simeon ground to a halt. The castle, which had been in continuous development for over 2 decades, would never be completed. Rooms remained unfinished. Planned extensions were abandoned. Workers were dismissed. The parties continued, but they were smaller now, quieter. The golden age had passed. And William Randolph Hearst was growing old. The last departure. In 1947, Hearst's doctors delivered a verdict that must have felt like a death sentence. His heart was failing. He needed access to medical care that could not be provided on a remote hilltop in California. If he wanted to live, he would have to leave Hearst Castle. He was 84 years old. He had spent nearly 30 years building his enchanted hill. It was the physical manifestation of everything he had ever wanted, ever dreamed, ever believed about himself. And now he had to abandon it. On a spring morning in 1947, William Randolph Hearst was carried to a car and driven down the winding road from Casa Grande. He would never return. Marion Davies accompanied him to Beverly Hills, where they took up residence in a mansion that Hearst had purchased years earlier. The rooms were filled with artwork from San Simeon, fragments of the dream he had been forced to leave behind. His final years were quiet. The man who had once commanded front pages and started wars now received few visitors. His family, particularly his wife Millicent and their sons, maintained careful distance from Marion Davies. There was little warmth between them. Marion stayed by his side. She read to him. She managed his household. She watched as the man who had once seemed invincible grew weaker with each passing month. On August 14, 1951, William Randolph Hearst died in his sleep. He was 88 years old. After the end, the funeral was held in San Francisco, far from the castle Hearst had loved. Millicent Hearst attended as the official widow. Marion Davies, after over 30 years of devotion, was excluded from the family's arrangements. She was not mentioned in the obituaries that ran in Hearst's own newspapers. Some accounts suggest she was at his bedside when he died. Others claim the family removed her from the house in his final hours. The truth, like so much about Hearst's life, remains obscured by competing narratives. Marion Davies would survive him by 10 years, remarrying quickly to a merchant marine captain and retreating from public life. She never spoke critically of Hearst. She protected his memory to the end. As for the castle, it stood empty. The Hearst Corporation maintained the property for several years, uncertain what to do with an estate that cost a fortune to operate and generated no revenue. The private zoo was disbanded, its animals dispersed to zoos across the country. The staff was reduced to a skeleton crew. In 1957, the Hearst family donated the castle to the state of California. It opened as a museum and state park the following year. Today, nearly 1 million visitors tour Hearst Castle annually. They marvel at the Neptune pool, gasp at the Roman pool, wander through rooms filled with Renaissance treasures. Guides tell carefully curated stories about Hollywood parties and famous guests. They do not always mention the loneliness. They do not always mention the man who built a paradise and died in exile from it. The empty rooms. Walk through Hearst Castle today, and you will notice something peculiar. Despite the grandeur, despite the thousands of art objects and acres of marble, there is an emptiness that cannot be filled. The rooms feel like stage sets. The furniture appears decorative rather than lived in. Even the bedrooms, designed to house the world's most glamorous guests, feel oddly impersonal. This was not an accident. William Randolph Hearst built his castle to impress, not to comfort. He designed it for parties, not intimacy. He filled it with objects but never truly made it a home. His private quarters, the Gothic suite on the third floor of Casa Grande, were modest by comparison with the rest of the house. A simple bed, a desk, a view of the hills where he had once camped with his father under the stars. He surrounded himself with hundreds of guests but confided in almost none of them. He employed thousands of workers but formed few genuine friendships. He possessed one of history's great love affairs, but he could never marry the woman he loved, and his devotion was tinged with control, jealousy, and the subtle cruelty of unequal power. In the end, the castle was a monument to ambition, not fulfillment. A temple built by a man running from his own mortality, trying desperately to create something permanent in a world where nothing lasts. The fog rolls in from the Pacific most evenings at San Simeon. It creeps up the hillside like a slow tide, swallowing the gardens, the guest houses, the towers of Casa Grande. For a few hours, the castle disappears entirely, hidden in gray silence. Then morning comes, and the sun burns through, and La Cuesta Encantada emerges once more, gleaming, eternal, as if it had stood there for centuries. This was Hearst's dream, to build something that would outlast him, something that would prove he had mattered, that his life had meant something, that he was more than just another rich man who lived and died and was forgotten. And in a sense, he succeeded. The castle survives. His name endures. Nearly a century after the last great party, people still come to marvel at what he built. But there is another lesson here, a quieter one. William Randolph Hearst spent his entire life trying to control the world. He controlled newspapers, politicians, public perception. He controlled Marion Davies, his guests, even the topics of conversation at his own dinner table. He believed that with enough money, enough power, enough will, he could shape reality itself. And yet the things that mattered most remained forever beyond his reach. He could not make his wife love him enough to let him go. He could not make Marion Davies a respected actress through sheer force of promotion. He could not prevent his empire from crumbling during the Depression, no matter how many treasures he sold. He could not stop his own heart from failing. And he could not stay in his castle. In the end, the man who had built a paradise was carried away from it forever, leaving behind the silent rooms, the empty pools, the art that would outlast his memory. We stand in those rooms today and imagine the parties, the glamour, the laughter. We see the photographs of movie stars posing by the Neptune pool. We read the guest books signed by presidents and princes. But if we listen closely, if we stand alone in one of those great halls after the tour groups have passed, we might hear something else. Not laughter, not music. Just silence. The silence of a man who had everything, except the one thing that might have made him happy. The silence of a castle that was always, somehow, empty, even when it was full. Hearst Castle remains open to visitors today, operated by California State Parks. The estate contains approximately 127 acres of gardens, terraces, pools, and walkways. The art collection on display represents only a fraction of what Hearst originally assembled. William Randolph Hearst is buried at Cypress Lawn Memorial Park in Colma, California. His grave is marked by a simple headstone, far smaller than one might expect for a man who built monuments. Marion Davies is buried at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles. Her crypt bears no mention of the man she loved for over 30 years. The castle remains unfinished,